If I told you I once shared a tuna melt with Elon Musk at a gas station diner in Arizona before he was famous, before he was Elon Musk, you'd probably assume I'm full of it. I would assume the same, but it happened. And what he said during that 48-minute conversation changed everything about how I see ambition, people, and him. And no, I'm not here to cancel Elon. I'm not here to worship him either. But I am here to tell you the truth, or at least my version of it. The version where he was just a guy with a weird stare, a broken-down car, and the coldest logic I've ever encountered. Back then, I was just a broke mechanic with a drinking problem and a chip on my shoulder. Now, I run a mid-sized solar company, debt-free, semi-retired at 41, and allergic to anything that looks like hero worship. Funny what one random conversation can do to a life. Let's rewind. It was 2001. I was 22, sweaty, hungover, and underpaid. I was working at a second-rate tire shop/auto repair joint off I-10 in Arizona, the kind with a hand-painted sign and a Coke machine that mostly dispensed bees. I was the guy who changed oil, checked tires, and occasionally did brake jobs when the boss wasn't around to double bill people. I hated it. I hated me. I spent most of my days grumbling through other people's car problems and most nights chain smoking and watching reruns of Cops like they were life lessons. Then came him. It was a Thursday, mid-June, one of those desert days where the air feels like it's actively judging you. A silver BMW E30 rolled into the lot, coughing smoke and sputtering like it had just sprinted out of a bad decision. The guy behind the wheel looked way too calm for someone whose car was making death noises. He steps out in a wrinkled button-up, khakis, and a pair of sneakers that had seen better centuries. His hair was doing its own thing, like it got directions from a different head entirely. He didn't look like money, not yet. Just awkward and oddly alert, like a bird that learned to speak Latin just to prove a point. "Car's overheating," he said. Accent was weird, South African maybe, and the battery light came on. I told him it'd be a couple hours. He nodded once and sat down on the bench outside like he had all the time in the world. 2 hours turned into 3. We had to wait on a part from a nearby junkyard, and I figured the guy would wander off or get annoyed. But he didn't. Instead, he walked over to the diner next door, Marla's, and came back 10 minutes later with 2 tuna melts and 2 orange sodas. He handed one to me like we were old college buddies. "Thought you might be hungry," I blinked. "You know I'm the mechanic, right? Not the valet." He shrugged. Still a person. That was the moment I realized. This guy wasn't normal. Not in a serial killer way. More in a logic makes me weird kind of way. We sat on the bench, elbows deep in tuna and engine grease. And that's when he asked me the question that yanked my entire brain out of neutral. "Do you like your life?" Not in a condescending way, just a question. I scoffed. "Hell no." "Then why are you still living it?" Now look, I'm not saying Elon Musk was some philosophical prophet in khakis, but the way he asked it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, hit me hard. Nobody had ever asked me that. Not like that. I told him I didn't have money. No degree, no rich uncle, no roadmap. He chewed his sandwich and said, "All maps. Our guesses." We ended up talking for nearly an hour. He told me he was heading to California, that he had a few ideas. He was between startups, something about payment processing, something else about online energy modeling, whatever the hell that meant. At the time, none of it made sense to me. What I did understand was how casually he talked about risk, about failure, about how most people run simulations of their fears instead of their goals. I thought he was full of crap, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. He got his car back and thanked me, gave me a business card that just said E. Musk and a number with a Palo Alto area code. I stuck it in my wallet and forgot about it, until everything started changing. For a while, life went back to normal. Or, well, normal for a guy who changed oil for minimum wage and spent most of his evenings staring at ceiling stains, wondering if his best years had already passed him by at 22. But that conversation stuck with me. Not the specifics, really. I still don't know what he meant by energy modeling, but the vibe of it, the confidence, the fact that he didn't flinch when I told him I hated my life, and that stupid quote, "Most people run simulations of their fears instead of their goals." It sat in my brain like a rock in a shoe. 3 weeks after the Elon encounter, I quit my job. No plan, no backup gig, just quit. My boss asked if I was drunk. I said, probably, but I'm also serious. I took the $1,204 I had in savings, paid rent for the month, and spent the next week scribbling business ideas on the back of pizza boxes and old shop receipts. Most of them were trash. One of them involved making car-themed scented candles. Let's never speak of that again. Eventually, I settled on something I understood: mobile auto repair. It wasn't sexy, but I had tools, a beat-up truck, and enough know-how to keep people from getting ripped off by chain shops. I printed flyers, taped them up at laundromats and gas stations, and started taking calls. Slowly, people started hiring me. Word spread. By the end of that summer, I'd made more than I ever had in a year at the shop. Not much, but enough to realize I wasn't trapped. That was the moment I remembered the card. It was still in my wallet, tucked behind my expired library card. E. Musk, Palo Alto number. Simple, weirdly classy. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to call, to tell him that something he said had lit a fire under me, that I'd actually done something with my life, that I didn't hate myself quite as much anymore. But the other part of me, maybe the smarter part, said no, because I knew the moment I made that call, it wouldn't be for him. It'd be for me, for validation, for permission. And I realized something that night. If I wanted to keep growing, I had to stop asking strangers for permission to live my life. So I walked outside, card in hand, and I burned it. 3 years passed. I grew the business, moved it online, bought better tools, took on a friend as a partner. We weren't rich, but we weren't broke either. I stopped drinking, started dating a woman named Elise who laughed like she didn't owe the world anything. Then one night in 2004, we were watching the news. A tech segment came on. The anchor mentioned a man who had just sold PayPal. I wasn't paying much attention until she said the name, Elon Musk. I stared at the screen. Same hair, same stare, same khakis, just fancier. Elise looked at me. You okay? I just nodded. But inside, my stomach was doing somersaults. I'd shared a tuna melt with a guy who just made hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd burned his card, and yet I didn't regret it. Not yet. The first time I saw him on TV, it was surreal. Not because he'd made it. I already knew from the PayPal story that he was loaded. It was how calm he looked, on camera. Almost rehearsed. Same face, same voice, but now behind it was this sheen of power, of polish, like someone had swapped out the guy from the gas station with an Elon-shaped press release. Elise asked me if I was going to try reaching out again. I told her I'd burned the card. She just said, probably for the best. She was right, but that didn't stop the itch in the back of my brain. The years went fast after that. Business got better. My buddy and I opened a small garage, hired 2 part-timers. We weren't changing the world, but we were making honest money and going home with clear consciences. By 2008, I had a steady routine: fix cars, pay bills, avoid drama. But the itch was still there, especially as Elon's name kept popping up more often. Tesla, SpaceX, interviews where he said stuff like, failure is an option here, or when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. They were good lines. They sounded deep. But I couldn't stop replaying our conversation years earlier, and how cold his logic felt up close. No sugar, no sympathy. I started noticing it more, something I now call rich people eyes. You know the look, the one that says, I hear you, but I've already calculated your value. It's not mean. It's not even personal. It's just data. Elon had that look, even back then. In 2010, my friend, the one I co-owned the shop with, went through a rough divorce. It nearly killed our business. I covered shifts, floated his salary for 3 months, even sold my truck to make payroll one week. When things stabilized, he thanked me, tears in his eyes. You didn't have to do that, he said. Exactly, I replied. I thought about Elon that night, wondered if he'd have done the same, if he'd sacrificed for a partner or just cut the dead weight and optimized the spreadsheet. That was when I realized I didn't want to be him. I wanted to be someone I could respect. But fate's a tricky little jerk. Because in 2013, something happened I never saw coming. I was invited to a small green tech conference in Nevada. Nothing huge. I gave a talk on affordable solar retrofits for low-income homes, something our side business had started doing on weekends. After my panel, a woman came up to me and said, "Mr. Musk would like to meet you." I laughed. "Wrong guy." "No," she said, smiling. "He recognized your name from the garage and Arizona." I froze. I hadn't told anyone at the conference about Arizona. 10 minutes later, I was being escorted through a service hallway to a small lounge behind the main stage. And there he was. Same weird hair, same stare, same unsettling calm. "Elon," he said, extending a hand. "I remember you. Tuna melt." I shook his hand, unsure whether to be honored or horrified. He motioned for me to sit. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask about my business. Just said, "You burned the card." I blinked. "Yeah, I did." He nodded. Smart. Just like that. No emotion, no judgment, just another variable in a system. And then, without missing a beat, he said, "You're not built for scale, but you're stable. That's rare." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't a compliment. Not really. Just an observation. He didn't offer me a job. He didn't ask for a favor. We talked for 6 minutes. Then he stood, thanked me for the company, and walked away, like we hadn't just cracked open a time capsule. I sat there in that lounge for a while, trying to figure out what had just happened. And then it hit me. The man I'd met in 2001, he was already this. The rest of us just didn't know it yet. The lounge emptied slowly after our meeting. I sat there in a fold-out chair, still holding a paper cup of flat conference soda, trying to process what just happened. That weird moment hung in the air. You burned the card. He remembered, not just my face, not just the tuna melt. He remembered that I burned the card. And then, he called me stable. Like I was a utility, a variable in a spreadsheet that would always stay within margin. It should have offended me, but it didn't. It felt honest. Cold, but accurate. Like getting a performance review from a robot who knows you better than your own mom. Then, just as I was getting ready to leave, the door opened again. He was back. "Almost forgot," Elon said, eyes flicking to mine like we were still mid-conversation. "There's one more thing." He walked over, leaned in slightly and said, "Don't trust the versions of me you'll see in the future. They're optimized for belief, not truth." And just like that, he left again. That was the last time I ever saw him. I sat in my hotel room that night staring at the ceiling, replaying the words like a riddle. Optimized for belief, not truth. He didn't just mean interviews. He meant personas. Public Elon. Tech Messiah Elon. Meme King Elon. Even failure-scarred, tearful Elon. All of it was still him. Just not him. Him. And that was the final nail in the idol coffin for me. Because here's the twist I promised at the start. I wasn't shocked by the money, or the fame, or even the way he remembered me after all those years. I was shocked by the warning. He knew what was coming. He knew what he would become, or what the world would turn him into. And he wanted me, some random mechanic he once shared a sandwich with, to know the truth. That underneath the TED Talks and the rocket launches and the billions was a man who once sat on a hot bench in Arizona and calculated whether or not he should trust a stranger with his lunch order. And that man never blinked. So no, I wouldn't want to meet him again. Not because I'm angry, not because I think he's evil, but because I already met the most honest version of him I'll ever see. And it was enough. TLDR. I accidentally had a conversation with Elon Musk before he was famous. It changed how I live my life. Years later, we met again, and he remembered everything. Before leaving, he gave me one last warning that changed how I saw not just him, but success itself.